Good evening, everybody. Thanks for staying. My name's Chris Campbell. I'm the literary manager of the Royal Court Theatre, where this production began, which is my excuse for being here. And I am joined this evening by Iain Simons, who is an expert on video games and digital life in general, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the moment, and by Rory Mullarkey, who is a playwright who's been produced at the Royal Court, and who also has an interest in some of the themes the play's been looking at tonight. The plan is that we're going to talk for 15 minutes or so, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions or make any points that you'd like to bring up. So that's the pattern. So Iain, can I start with you? You saw the play tonight.
I did see the play tonight, yes.
So it's fresh in your mind.
As fresh as it will be, yes.
Yes. Did it seem recognisable to you? Is this a world, it's set a little bit into the future? Did it seem credible and possible to you, technologically speaking?
I didn't know. So I can see all the technology. The technology was fantastic, but I think one of the things that it spoke to for me was the urbanity of the technology. So people who have been, and I don't mean to say it in a kind of like a Tron way, but people who have Tron. There's a clear reference point.
I think we're amongst experts.
It's important to test the audience, make sure we've got some common ground before we friendly nerds in the house. But there is a material and an immaterial, but there is an urbanity and there is a normality to existing online, and there isn't particularly a disconnect between those things. I think with many of so one of the things I do is I run a festival called GameCity, which is about video game culture. So much of my professional life is about translating and engaging middle class white boys with what video games can be, because they're a rich and interesting place. The disconnect is between what that world commercially has become, I think, and its ability to translate and invite other people into the kind of the literacies they need to understand it. That wasn't actually a question at all. I really enjoyed.
It's fine. The questions are
I really enjoyed. Yeah, and I really enjoyed. Yeah, I very much recognise this. This absolutely.
Can I ask you before I come to Rory? Can you forgive me if this sounds facetious, but can you remember you must be able to remember a time before the online world existed?
I'm 23. No, I do. So I'm actually 40.
They laughed at that as well, which is a bit.
I won't go any higher. So I grew up in the early 80s with home computing and open computing and Commodore 64s and ZX Spectrums and accessible. I'm really sorry, there's anyone here from Nottingham. And open, accessible computing, and then the generation that created video games, accidentally through Tandy and through being able to build and be able to make, was I guess a generation sort of slightly older than me. And I now have a son. I have a 10-year-old boy who doesn't know what £10 a month given internet dial-up was. You know, a moment before, we used to log on and then log off. I don't log off anymore. I can't remember the last time I logged off. It's inconvenient when I have to log back on because it's a public computer at work. So I do recognise that child. I recognise the fade in between that, and I recognise my parents feeling that particular kind of friction with our son, because they want to buy him things and stuff, right? What he wants is iTunes points. He wants Xbox Live credits. He wants to download things, whether that's music, whether that's films, whether that's video games. It's kind of immaterial. They feel a real distance of that, as do I, naturally.
There was an article just before Christmas in the Daily Mash online comedy newspaper, and it said everything men want no longer exists, and it was about the difficulty of buying men Christmas presents because, as you say,
Right.
Music and film is all we want, and it doesn't physically exist anymore.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah.
I naturally, it's irrational, because it's much better quality download than it was on VHS, right? But I don't, I instinctively don't really like, I miss a level of materiality. So.
Rory, can I ask you, as a playwright,
Yep.
Have you felt the influence on your practice, on your writing, of the increase or the increased impact of gaming in the virtual world?
Well, for me specifically, yeah, definitely, but that's just because I really like video games, so I often write a play and then realise that it's one character going through a series of encounters. Then maybe they meet somebody who's a bit more powerful and they have an encounter with them. Usually they overcome that obstacle and then go on to another encounter, and then eventually when the narrative drive and interest in the audience has ended, then it ends. So I feel like, obviously on my practice particularly, it's been extremely influential, but I don't know about, I can't really speak for playwrights as a whole. Although it's interesting to see how the influence, I don't know, to look across the theatrical, I guess, spectrum, for want of a better pun. I thought it was good. Well, that's my crowd over here. Yeah, and seeing sort of the influence of things like Punch Drunk or, I guess, Coney, or companies who afford the spectate, I mean that's not even the right word to use, the participant, the audience member, whatever that is, more a choice in terms of the possibilities for interaction within the context of the show, if you can even call it that. I mean, Coney would say that it would call it a game and not a play. So I think that's interesting to see the way that it's the way the two have crossed over from one into the other. But I think for me, as a kind of fairly traditional sort of sitting down and writing a script kind of guy, the influence is more formal. But I think again, it's a thing to do with the way people's attention spans work. Sort of in a world where you're watching YouTube clips or engaged with box sets, as opposed to kind of getting your reference points from reading really long novels or like watching Ibsen or whatever. Suddenly the way that you consume media and the way that you might consume a play or watch a play is different.
It's interesting you mentioned Ibsen, because I often think, watching Ibsen, that he is a fantastic demonstration of how much quicker we are now at getting things. Because Ibsen can take an hour and a half building slowly towards a revelation. Yeah. And you can feel the audience going, we knew after 10 minutes, you know. Yeah. That must be something you're aware of, that clues are picked up so quickly now.
It's really interesting, because then people will go and watch it and kind of be aware that they know what's going to happen, but they're already keyed into, well, it's Ibsen, so it's supposed to be boring and I'm supposed to know what happens. And so they think of it as a different thing. Whereas if it's a new piece of work, and you're trying to be keyed into how an audience's attention span works nowadays, it might work, I guess, a bit more different from that. But I mean, going back to games, it feels like, again, that like there's so little exposition needed when you start something. In fact, like I don't want to watch like a 25-minute long cutscene at the beginning of a thing to explain. I just want to like get on and play, which means that I need as little information as possible. I feel like we need less information to make those connections than we might have done 100 years ago.
Okay, thanks. Iain, can I come back to you? Can we talk about morality for a little while? Obviously, the play, essentially, in my opinion, it's a moral puzzle. It's a question of, does this matter? Is this bad? Is this acceptable? Do you think the virtual world has altered morality? Is there a different morality in the virtual world than in the actual world? Or is it just presented in a different way?
Do you know what? I'd like to reframe that slightly to be a discussion almost about manners, right? as a, if you like, our most everyday and actually the lowest level of, I think, the kind of morality that I think you're talking about, the themes we're talking about here. So, there's a huge kind of disconnect between the, if you like, kind of the permission, everything being permissible, and the lack of responsibility, and particularly enacted in the gaming community through Twitter, like particularly enacted through Twitter, as a place where anything can be said, right, which is great, which is obviously great, right? But I think without an opportunity to kind of rehearse the power of what that means, this happened incredibly quickly. So understanding our responsibility within that, because I was taught manners, but I was taught basically to be nice, right? But all the people I was taught to be that to were in front of me, whereas in the room where that was happening, we weren't taught. And I don't think kids are taught now. We're taught not to, how not to be groomed on the internet, or how to be safe, but we're not taught the kind of responsibility which my parents would have called manners, and which we could extend to being ethics. And I think that is a real threat. And until that is normalised, and that kind of a different kind of literacy and a different kind of communication begins to be communicated at kind of primary school, at secondary school, kind of level, I think we're going to continue to have that kind of problem. But that's to do with it being normal. This isn't a kind of annex to life. You're probably all start tweeting now. This is rubbish, hashtag never. It's Byron Sharp. He's, he doesn't look. He looks 60 rather than 40. Because it doesn't matter. Because I don't know who you are. You hurt my feelings. It doesn't matter because we may never meet again. But that sense of like a very human responsibility is it's not completely absent. There are wonderful, warm, wonderfully compassionate places within something like Twitter or something like the internet. But there's a lack, I think, at the moment of manners. That sounds really old-fashioned.
That's very interesting. I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it. And Rory, if I can ask you now, the other side of the moral question is the morality of representing certain things. Yeah. And I'm very, very much to my surprise, I was thinking earlier when I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about the Charlie Hebdo and the Mohammed cartoons, what's the word, controversy, incident, whatever you call it, where the representation of something has suddenly, we've been reminded of the power of representation. And one of the things this play, I think, skirts around is whether something should not be represented, even if there's no physical harm in the real world. Whether something simply should not be represented. And this, which is, the virtual world is the most sophisticated drawing tool yet invented, but it's still a drawing, isn't it, in a way? Why does it matter what we represent in that way?
Well, I think it's interesting because some people, I saw this a while ago, but the just having a child perform the role that the child performs in the play and the way, nothing happens, but that role and the representation of that felt like it was something that generated, on some level, controversy or discomfort in an audience. I guess it feels to me to be. It depends what your intent with that representation is. I don't know if you're not making an artistic point. You're just trying to piss people off, which is an interesting thing in the context of Charlie Hebdo, I think. Then that becomes it's suddenly the nuances within that realm rather than somewhere else. So I think it's really, I don't know. The thing this made me think about more actually when I was watching it was like I guess games like Grand Theft Auto or maybe even something like Fable, where you are put into the kind of, you are given control of of an avatar who is allowed to, who is given the license to do destructive, amoral things, and is that something which in any way affects, because you know that that exists within a virtual consequenceless world, is that something that in any way would affect your moral compass or the moral choices that you might make in the real world? And that's a really interesting question, I think.
Which none of us is in any position to answer yet, really. There's no...
Well, I don't really know, because I was just before, I was like sitting in the pub, like Googling morality of video games.
No expense has been spared tonight, folks.
I've done my research. You can't say I haven't done my research. And like, but of course, the kind of the standard thing, which you can sort of go back. I don't know, probably you can go back further than how, say, Doom was used as, or Wolfenstein was used as a thing to sort of after Columbine. I feel like even going sort of further on than that, it becomes, I don't know. It's, yeah. I think it's a question that will continue to be there and not go away.
Yes.
I think the big deficit with video games as a culture is that there's almost no humanity present at the centre of them. So, to unpack that slightly more, we know who wrote this play, we know who wrote Clockwork Orange, we know who wrote Naked Lunch, we know that like there's an authorial presence who is participating, because that's what culture is, in talking to other people. And we can name our favourite authors and our favourite musicians and our favourite playwrights and our favourite artists, so we would struggle to name more than 5, probably, video game developers, and that's if you're really into video games, right? And we're talking about a piece of culture that's ubiquitous and growing, and it's all around us all the time. And we don't know who made these things. So in terms of this, video games' ability to participate in any discussion about morality, any discussion about culture, and the kinds of things we talk about, the people who make GTA, they're not here talking about having a discussion about GTA
but that's an interesting kind of question of agency, because when you're playing GTA, you feel like you're making GTA, like you're the person who's like, I'm driving this car, I'm stealing this stuff, whereas when you're kind of passive in it, when you're watching the Nether, you're like, ooh, Jennifer Haley chooses to show me these things, which is which feels like obviously it isn't, because the author of GTA is still I don't know how that it feels like the question kind of goes strange.
Yeah, but it's a strange question, but you were saying, so last week, Jennifer was here talking about the play. I think my point is that, like,
broadly, culturally, the makers of video games don't tend to be present in the room talking about the video game with the public, and that's a massive, like, I think that's the single biggest problem at the heart of video games, and why they continue to be largely treated with suspicion, because you can't, I don't know, you made them, and that's the most, that's the thing we sort of try and pursue most with the work that we do, is, and it's not that they don't want to talk, and it's not that they're not interesting, erudite, complicated, incredibly creative people. There's no deficit of that at all. It's that video games emerged in an industry that ended up being marketed like it was, chicken nuggets.
Yeah. Stop calling them games might be a start. If you stopped calling them games, that might help.
Wow. I'd like to find out what people think about that. Okay. I have some anecdotes about that, but I have to find out what people think.
Okay. Just one more question before we open it up, which is, this is a rather naive question, but are you broadly optimistic about the development of these sorts of things, or do you think it's all going to spiral into a dark and terrible place?
Yeah, absolutely. Fundamentally, I'm completely optimistic, because I think people are basically good.
That's a very old argument, right? A very old argument indeed. I wonder whether there's anyone who would like to ask anything or raise a point. It's pretty gloomy out there, so wave bright. Yes.
Yeah. No. I'm sorry. What was your name again? Iain, you mentioned, we were talking, touching on the idea that the developers are sort of unable or unwilling to come forward and talk about their game. Do you think there's a large, to a large extent, with games like Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty, Activision or Blizzard, the big companies, they're not trying to create a game where names are allocated, because in doing so, and this is sort of from my own opinion, not necessarily from anything more concrete, but in providing a name or a face, as there is with a director in a film or in a play, they have more power, they have more control, they have more authority over the say of what happens. So, for instance, Uncharted, with, unfortunately, the name's gone from my mind. Amy Hennig, yeah. So she had a great sense of control and authority with Uncharted 2 and 3, because she became this strong powerhouse of feminine force with writing within a very male-based system. So, do you make me think the bigger companies are more to blame than the lack of willingness from individual developers? Because the indies tend to come forward on those sorts of topics.
Yeah, I mean, so it's not in the shareholder interest to have like a Will Wright, right, who can say what he wants and ultimately. You know, so on one level, yes, and if you just spend £150 million making GTA 5, you know, then I can totally understand that you want to be in some way in control of that message. I have a lot of sympathy for that, obviously, as any other, I'm sure. I think what's interesting in the last few years with the emergence of the kind of independent sector, the sort of the indie sector, who are starting to have more, I guess what you think is one of which is a bit more commercial like muscle, because people are, like, you can be an indie developer now and you can actually like have a, you can make some money and you can live, right? So more people are entering now. We're getting a much greater diversity of people, and we're starting to make games, which is brilliant, because it's not just gamers making games for more gamers, right? And we're getting things about things other than Space Marines, you know? Space Marines are cool, right? But there are other things we can talk about. So it's fantastic if Rory and Jennifer would make games, we get different voices coming into this this one, because that's what it so desperately needs. Is something other than middle-class white guys.
Yeah, Rory would represent a real. Yes, someone in the middle there. Yes.
So I am a gamer. I'm a total gamer nerd.
Congratulations.
And I'm not a white man, obviously. And a lot of the stuff that has been happening with women in games, I think, is indicative of that. But I also think that we came to see this play. There's maybe, I don't know, I can't estimate, 100, 200 people max, whereas a video game reaches 5 million people at once, right? So I don't think that the developers have the same level of agency, because it's too big for them to be able to speak, you know, to their audience in that way.
So the developers, I'm not suggesting developers necessarily need to speak through the game, but I'm talking about the developers' like presence in the story around the game. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that there's an interview with Jennifer in the program, and Jennifer would speak in the media around this, and the director would speak in the media around this, and the communication surrounding this play, the author is present in it. I mean, is a much. I think I'm probably making a much more sort of childlike or like simpler point. But when you make, you know, like literally the ability of creators in the video game world to participate, like in the culture around them. Like I think that's what's going to give games cultural confidence and the ability to talk about different things and explore more things. I think that's really important.
Although I guess, I don't know, like I try my best to, while a play of mine is on, stay the hell out of any kind of like discussion about it, because I would rather people would go and watch the play and allow it to do its own work artistically, rather than that they would see an interview with me in a newspaper, magazine, blog or whatever and think, he's pointing to meaning in what he's making. I'm more than happy to, be more than happy to talk about it afterwards, but while it's on, I think I'd rather stay away. So I don't necessarily think it's the same case, and that these people, you know, the guys making GTA were like, no, the art must do its work or whatever. But I do think there's something to be said for that, maybe. Don't know.
But that's different still. I mean, a writer, Carol Churchill, a writer who won't talk to the press, is still different from just not knowing who wrote it, having no idea who they are.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So, firstly, I don't think that I don't believe there's any link between people's digital interactions and things in real life. Like, there have been studies that have tried to say, you know, do video games cause blah blah blah, and I don't think there's anything conclusive. But I think it's definitely the case that people's online behaviour in those games is linked to their online behaviour, something like Twitter. You know, so it's a very similar interface, but with real consequences. So my question kind of is, in the last couple of years, there have been quite a lot of events that have brought anonymity to public view and kind of digital responsibility. Charlie Hebdo is one. Gamergate is an effect of the negative effect of anonymity. Edward Snowden is an example of the positive effect of anonymity. Like, because these are happening more and more often, do you think it's likely to change sooner? Like the kind of role of anonymity and responsibility?
For everyone at the back, could you repeat the question?
Yes, absolutely, I will indeed. The question is, in the light of a number of events in recent years, is the nature and status of anonymity online going to have to change? Is that a fair? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think responsibility-wise, you know, in the context of something like, you know, when I have a play on, I'd look up on the internet what people are saying about it, and sometimes people say really mean stuff. So that obviously is something that, but I don't know I would obviously in no way query anyone's right to do that. So I think it's a difficult thing with what Iain was saying, for instance, about manners, but which I think, you know, obviously if you extrapolate that debate further out, then you get into something like respect for other cultures, which felt like it was what was kind of somewhere near the core of the Charlie Hebdo thing. So, I mean, I think it's I can't say what I personally think is going to happen. I think it's an extremely interesting thing, an extremely pertinent thing, but I have absolutely no idea. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's obvious that perhaps the easiest way to make it possible to abandon good manners is to give someone anonymity. You know, if no one you know is going to see what you're saying, then that immediately disinhibits you to some extent, doesn't it? And I think that's at the heart of the question. Can we imagine a time where you can't be anonymous if you're making comments, where you have to say who you are? And then free speech is much, in my opinion, much more defensible. You know, I can say what I want, but I can't necessarily pretend to be someone else and say what I want.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, for something like for trolling or whatever, that feels like it's going to be something that's yeah. Well, but whereas with Twitter, a lot of the time people are presenting that I guess it's a continuum. That there are people who go, well, I don't know that person, therefore I am happy to be myself and say that, or there are people who kind of adopt a fake identity in order to do that. So it's sort of where on that continuum do you start to draw a line and go, oh no, you're not, you are yourself if you put your name to it, or you're not yourself if you kind of adapt some kind of avatar, or is your avatar you or not you? It's, I mean, yeah, it's what the play's dealing with as well, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd hate it to be a legislative, I was talking about that word, solution. I think that would be the wrong path to go down. much rather that the solution was born out of education and literacy and respect and those kinds of things that we do. I'm very resistant for all the reasons you say, because without we're really tripping down a path of losing anonymity and tracking and all that kind of stuff naturally already. So I think that's not the solution. I think it comes out. I'd say it comes out of education. It comes out of education. It's all boring answers now. Probably sound like my dad tonight. But I think it's true.
Thank you. We've probably got time for one or possibly two more. Yes.
I just wanted to chime in on the anonymity personally. I mean, there's already sort of real name laws in China in terms of their social media, and I think that's predominantly used mostly to kind of harm people for consequences of their actions. I mean, you see on a few rare occasions that there's been sort of breaks in what Chinese internet users are able to get access to. They go and spam Obama's website and just say whatever they want, which I think is really interesting. So, yeah, I'm sorry, that was really mostly just chiming in on an agreement that perhaps it comes from education, because otherwise, where do you draw the line between stopping people from doing bad things or stopping people from doing whatever you want? You know?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was really
No, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, vigorous waving, yes.
Hello. Mine was basically a question of, I'm a gamer, and obviously when I was younger, games weren't anywhere near as accessible as they are today. So I grew up with, I think the only thing we could get was maybe Game Boy Color. And nowadays I have a 3-year-old niece, and she's always on her iPad. She knows how to use it better than I do. But I had a very childhood where I would go outside and I'd scrape my knee and I'd play. And now I love gaming. But the thing is that she's probably going to grow up in a much more technological world than I've grown up in. Do you think there's a danger that maybe we will lose connection with the real world because it's so much easier to access technology and to access games than it used to be?
I think it's really easy to access trees. I'm not, I don't mean that, but like, we can still have fresh air and still run around, and and that's really important. It's really important. So, and I really share that paranoia with Tom, right? Because I'm the most paranoid of these. He's been on there for an hour. He's got to come off and run around and fall over and hurt himself somehow. But I think they can coexist, and it kind of comes back, I think, to the biggest problem, I think, is if I was, I am a parent. If I was a parent who didn't have experience in video games, and if I was my parents, I don't know where to direct you to find out about video games to help you parent in a world where there's video games as technology. I don't know. I know from a perspective of, well, make sure he doesn't suffer or give him epilepsy, or make sure he's, from a defensive position. But from a point of view, how can these things add to life? How can I be a parent in a world where there are video games that can use these things together? There's this massive vacuum where there's no advice and there's no culture there. But that needs to urgently to be filled by you, by parents who remember running around and falling over, and I think who can help other parents and other people, and other policymakers actually create that balance. But it's a balance, right? We can have that, I think.
Well, when I was at school, there was a boy called Kieran Prashar. He's presumably not in tonight, so I'm going to talk about him. But he, when Final Fantasy VIII came out, he played it for 40 hours over the first weekend, and then came in, and everybody would kind of come in and go like, everybody would come in and be like, how many hours have you played it for? How many? And it was like, and then Prashar was like, bloody 40, mate, and everyone was flabbergasted. But if you go, I feel like if you go and look at, I don't know, I think I tried to replay Final Fantasy VII or whatever recently. I was kind of like, what's going on? It looks rubbish. Like I don't care. And so like I don't think Kieran Prashar would have like if when I don't know the new Assassin's Creed comes out or whatever. I don't think he was going to play it any more or less. I don't think it was particularly to do with the way that technology is developing or particular access to things. to things. It was just that he had that kind of personality that wanted to throw himself into a thing for 40 hours, I guess. And also, I mean, I feel like it can influence, sometimes it has influenced me positively, educatively. Like talking about Assassin's Creed, I really liked Assassin's Creed 2. And that was basically the sole cause of my recent harebrained idea of going and living in Florence for ages. And then when I was in Florence, and I went to the main art gallery there, which is the Uffizi, like full of kind of Renaissance masterpieces. And the first thing in the gift shop when you walk down is like all this Assassin's Creed memory. And I feel like it was, you know, that's maybe, you know, people like me, Assassin's Creed is introducing them to the works of Piero della Francesca or whatever, so that's only a good thing.
I think that was always the intention with that game.
I don't doubt it.
Look, we have to draw it to a close. I thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you, Iain. Thank you, Rory. And I just finished by saying 40 hours. To the fan of Test cricket, that's nothing. Thanks very much indeed. Good night.